Hello and welcome to the Deep Track Podcast, an exploration of watches, trends, and culture with a few adventures along the way. I'm your host, Blake Bettner. This week we welcome guest Brian Freedman to the podcast. Brian is a wine, spirits, food, and travel writer, and he contributes to publications such as Food and Wine, Forbes.com, Whiskey Advocate, Wine Enthusiast, and more. He's also a consultant to restaurants and a wine and spirits educator. I've met Brian a few years back at a wind-up fair here in New York. He also happens to be a pretty big watch guy. We talk about, wine and spirits. We talk a little bit about watches as well. Brian has also published a book called Crushed, How a Changing Climate is Altering the Way We Drink. We talk a little bit about that book as well, the process of writing it, and then really kind of get into wine and spirits as a hobby and how we experience them, and get into a little bit of cocktail making and wine tastings and stuff like that. So it's a really fun discussion, and boy, it's something that that could have gone on for a couple of hours, I think. So maybe we'll try and get him onto the podcast at some point soon. Brian has a couple of really great stories in here about drinking some great wines. Just like watches, it really kind of comes down to the experiences around these things rather than hoarding them on shelves and things like that. So we get into all of that, and he's also got a great recollection of his experience buying his Speedmaster that is on his wrist in this episode. I will let him get into that here in the show. So thanks for tuning into this episode, and a quick reminder that the Deep Track is reader supported. I will leave a link to our Patreon down below, as well as the full show notes for this episode. All right, with that, enjoy this week's episode. All right, Brian Freedman, thank you so much for joining me on the Deep Track Podcast. I really appreciate your time. It's good to see you, my friend.
It's good to see you too. I'm excited to be here. It's always great talking to you.
Yeah, you've been on my mind over the past couple of years since we met, actually, because like many people, I suppose, over the COVID break, got into a few different hobbies. Cocktail making, the craft of cocktail making, I guess, was one of the things that I got into, and we'll get into to a little bit of that as we go. But Brian, for people who aren't familiar with you, maybe give yourself a little bit of an introduction. Tell us who you are.
So I am a wine and spirits and travel writer. I have 6 pieces a month for Food and Wine Magazine's website. Occasionally contribute to the print magazine, contribute to Forbes.com, Whiskey Advocate, print and digital. I host events and tastings for corporate and private clients around the country. And my first book was published in October of 2022 called Crushed, How a Changing Climate is Altering the Way We Drink. And I actually found out just the other week that my publisher is going to be coming out with a paperback edition, which is great news.
Oh, excellent. Well, congratulations. You mentioned that book was published in 2020?
October of 22.
October 22, sorry. So we'll get to that a little bit, because I'd love to ask how things have shifted, have changed, especially during your time researching for that book, and what the process of writing it was like, too. I'm always curious about. But Brian, you're also a watch guy. You and I met at a watch event in New York, one of the wind-up fairs 3 years ago, 4 years ago, something like that.
I think it was like soon after people were allowed out of their houses, but not without masks for giant events like that.
Yes, and it's a miracle anyone showed up at all to the event, I'm sure. But that's where we met and got a chance to connect. You were wearing, if I'm not mistaken, a Speedmaster.
Not yet, but
not
close.
Yet. But we talked about a Speedmaster.
We did. So if I recall that day, my wife and I were spending just a couple of nights in New York. I'm based outside of Philadelphia, so New York is an hour and 20 minutes on Amtrak. It's close enough. So I'm there all the time. My wife and I were up there, and we happened to walk by. I believe the event was in Chelsea Market.
Yeah.
And you were at, I want to say, the Oris table. And when you introduced yourself, I kind of embarrassingly fanboyed out, and I go, "Oh my God, Blake, I read you." And we started talking. And I actually, it is partially your fault that I did go down the Speedmaster rabbit hole, because we were talking about that extensively. So I'll invoice you for it.
Yeah, sorry about that. So you ended up not long after that with the Speedmaster, clearly, which are you wearing it right now?
I am. In fact, just earlier this week, I had it taken off of a black NATO with a white stripe.
Uh-huh.
So we bought it. I had been eyeing the Speedy for a long time, and then the 3861 came out, and I
Mm-hmm.
thought, oh man, if this is
Mm-hmm.
like the universe sending me a signal.
Yeah.
And I'd been saving up, and my wife had always said, look, let's make your first, either it was either going to be the Speedy or a Rolex Oyster Perpetual or the
Mm-hmm.
Explorer. The 36 I love,
Oh
fits
yeah,
great.
yeah.
um, and she said, but let's make it for something that you'll remember. So when my book made it through all the many layers of editorial and fact checking and all this other stuff, we said, okay, now's the time to do this. And after our conversation and after way too many hours deep diving into yeah, I mean, Blake, I lost sleep over deciding whether I wanted Hesselite in a closed case back for
Yeah.
historical accuracy or the Sapphire Sandwich to see the beautiful 3861 movement,
Yeah.
um, and ended up going with the Sapphire Sandwich.
Okay, good.
And the team at the Omega Boutique, we went to the Omega Boutique, it's maybe 25 minutes from my house here, and we dragged the kids along. It was a cold January night. We dragged them along. They didn't want to come. And the team there, they had us there for an hour, and they charmed our daughters, who are 10 and 13 now. They were, I guess 2 years younger each back then,
Yeah.
telling them about, the moon landing and showing them, larger pictures of the movement itself.
Mm-hmm.
And it became one of those memories that now, whenever they see me wear the watch, which has become my daily watch for the most part,
Mm-hmm.
they think back on that experience of
Oh yeah.
having gone there with me. And one day, when I go to the great vineyard or distillery in the sky,
Mm-hmm.
one of them will get this watch.
Yeah.
And, I think that memory will be attached to it. And that's one of the things that I love so much about these objects, right? Whether it's watches, maybe it's a corkscrew, right? My wife got me this corkscrew when we just found out that she was pregnant with our oldest daughter, right? And
Mm-hmm.
this is made with barrel wood from Chateau Margaux.
Oh wow.
And I love this, but this, more than the physicality of the object itself, which I love, is the symbolism that has grown attached to it, and all the bottles that I've opened up with this over the years for special
Mm-hmm.
occasions. So I think there's magic associated with these things that we love doing deep dives into.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, and of course, there's a huge parallel there with collecting watches, and none of these things are necessary, so that you kind of have to find or something else about the experience that you enjoy, and this is what I talk about, the why over the what that ends up being more important, and being comfortable with the experiences that you have in this hobby for things other than just chasing something. It's about these experiences that you have, and the connection that you had there at the Omega Boutique. That's really beautiful. And hopefully somebody from Omega is listening to this so they can call down and give props to the boutique there
Well, I will
outside of
tell you,
Philadelphia.
I will tell you, I had managed to, I got a proper, Bergeon uh, tool to be able to
Yep.
take the pins out.
Yeah.
And when I took off the bracelet, this was, months and months ago, and put on the NATO, which the boutique so generously gifted me
Oh
that
wow.
night,
Okay.
because I was wearing like an Apple Watch with one of those Velcro NATO things,
Mm-hmm.
and they just said, we want to give this to you, a proper Omega NATO, so that you
Wow.
have options, which was
Okay.
incredible.
Yeah.
So I managed to get the NATO on, but I completely blew out the pins when I took off the bracelet.
Oh really?
So I went to the store, to the boutique, and it was amazing. The manager of the store, Joshua, who should be like CEO of Omega one day. He's incredible and a testament to the company. And I said, oh, I said, I'm drawing a blank on your name. What's your name? And he said, Joshua. I said, that's right. I'm Brian. You sold me my Omega. He goes, I remember you. How's the writing? How's the wife and kids?
Oh wow.
And
Okay.
it just, the people that you meet in this
Mm-hmm.
hobby,
Yeah.
whether it's wine or spirits or watches, whatever it might be, I think it's amazing. My wife has always said that interested people are interesting people.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that. If you have passion for something, I don't care
Yeah.
what it is. Paper towels, have
Mm-hmm.
passion for it, but go deep in something. That's interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I've noticed that similarity in some of the few hobby spaces that I'm in. It's the curious people are the ones that I always kind of find up saddling up next to and wanting to chat with and wanting to go deeper on and learning how they experience the hobby. And I love coming across people like that whose experiences of the hobby are different than mine, and but they're equally as passionate about it and curious about it. And I feel like that kind of deepens how I think about these spaces, and adds a little bit of a little piece onto my eventual wisdom over these things, is kind of having a better understanding of how other people experience these hobbies as well. So I'm glad to see that watch on your wrist and that it's worked out so well and that you had such an awesome experience at the Omega Boutique. I love this watch. I've said. I've spoken ad nauseum and written tons about the bracelet itself being a game changer for the Speedmaster. The bracelet is just fabulous on that. And when I take mine off, it looks good on NATOs. It looks good on whatever you want to put it on. But that bracelet is just so good that it always ends up kind of back on there before too long. So,
Does, and it changes the weight of it on your wrist, the way
mm,
the way the watch itself moves. It's fascinating. It felt like when he put it back on the bracelet and brought it out to me on Monday, because I was terrified to break more pins, so I had the pros do it.
sure.
I sort of, it felt like, hello, old friend. It just,
Yeah.
I like it's almost liquid, the
Hmm.
way the links move over your wrist.
Yeah, it's a fabulous bracelet, especially at that price point. The watch that I'm wearing right now is a new IWC Ingenieur 3289, I think is the reference, with the teal dial here, and this watch is a bit more expensive than that, but it's my justification is always like you have to feel how the bracelet feels on your wrist. It feels fantastic. But the standard bearer, how I think about that, is that Speedmaster bracelet. That is a fantastic
Mm,
bracelet. And especially when you're talking around, I don't know, $7,000 price point, give or take a little bit here or there. That's a bracelet that you would expect to find on, 10,000 plus watches. So, if you're going to have a bracelet and charge a lot for the watch, then that is usually the standard that I hold a watch to, is that
yes.
Speedmaster bracelet. I would love to see it come to, or a similar style of bracelet to like more watches in the Seamaster line, like a Seamaster
Yeah.
300 with a bracelet like this. I think would be fantastic. I would even love to see like Grand Seiko make a bracelet like that and put it on some of their watches.
Yes.
There's something about that works really well. Are you still happy that you went with the sapphire sandwich version of this
Every
watch?
day.
Every day.
Every day.
So you make a point of, before you put the watch on or when you take it off, flip it over, check out the movement. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, I do. And at night, we have different routines with both of our daughters.
Mm-hmm.
So our older daughter, I'll sit there with Sophie and we'll do some of the games on the New York Times app, right? So we'll do connections, we'll do the mini crossword.
Mm-hmm.
When I go to put Olivia to bed, she's a watch head, and we actually for the last couple of months, I'll lay in bed with her with my iPad, and we will watch Wristwatch Revival with Marshall,
Wow.
and
Okay.
and she's calling the pieces beforehand. I mean, she goes, Dad, watch. Barrel Bridge is coming next. And I'm like, you're like a wizard. You're a 10-year-old horological wizard.
That's
So
awesome. That's
so we
great. So
love looking at the
she's
movement.
going to remember that one, and that's a great watch actually for people that are curious about it, because of course it's a manual wind movement, so you can see everything that's going on back there, and it's a great looking movement, and everything is not super complicated for a chronograph, so it's you can kind of see what's going on, which is a great thing. I remember my dad's dad had a pocket watch that you pop open the back and everything is like, and of course a pocket watch is like super simple and everything's like giant, so you can kind of put the pieces of how it was working together in your mind, but looking at it was like open up this whole universe, and that was kind of the first thing that kind of pulled me into this world, I guess. And now look at me.
Yeah.
That's what I do for
Yeah, this
whatever
is
this is
what
called for a
happens,
living.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, that's what I say, whatever this is called for a living.
yeah, yeah.
It's and I love that you're wearing the new IWC Ingenieur, because the next watch purchase, which, when hopefully the next book gets sold in not too long from now and written.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so we always promised our older daughter will get this one day because we
Mm-hmm.
love watching For All Mankind together on Apple,
Of course,
and
yeah.
so that connection. But we were flying back. We took the kids to Marrakesh, not this past December, but the one before, and we flew through London.
Mm-hmm.
And on the way home, we had this interminably long layover in Heathrow, as tends to happen there.
Yeah.
And there was I believe it was a Watches of Switzerland boutique not far from where we were hanging out. So we went in there and fell in love with the IWC Mark 20 with this sort of navy blue sunburst dial on the
Yeah.
blue leather strap
Yeah, it's
and
beautiful.
tried it on. So I think that's going to be the next purchase.
That's going to be the one. Yeah, the Mark 20 is a great, fantastic watch. It's super easy to wear and pretty easy to get along with, like every single day as well. Of course, has the same movement as this guy, but doesn't come on a bracelet, to my knowledge. They might have like a beads of rice bracelet that fits it. But
Okay.
I don't think it comes on one OEM. But I love that watch. It's a great kind of everyday watch option. So that's a purchase I can get behind.
All right, good.
D-
I'm gonna order it right now online.
yeah.
I have your permission.
So you mentioned your next book. Of course, you are a published author, both online and physical. This Crushed book. I'd love to hear more about this. This is about how the changing climate on this planet is affecting some of the drinks that we enjoy. Of course, it's affecting many things, but the land that we grow, a lot of the stuff that produces many of the things that we like to drink is being affected by this as well. When did you begin the process of writing this book, or when did you come up with the idea of this is a good thing that I want to start writing about?
So two very separate timelines there. So when did I come up with the idea for the book? One of the big perks of what I do for a living is I get to travel generally 1 week out of every month for the most part to wine regions or spirit regions around the country and around the world. And over the years, I noticed that during these long wine soaked or spirit soaked lunches, dinners, sometimes they bleed into each other. Those are hard days of work.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's air quotes there.
Somebody has to do it.
Um, yeah, exactly. This is why I run marathons slowly, but I run them because like it's the only way to stay relatively healthy.
Yeah.
I noticed that the grape growers, the winemakers, the distillers, 10, 12 years ago, they would mention how, the weather is doing weird stuff, right? And it was a brief part of the conversation, then we'd move on to something else. Over the years, those brief conversations started to play more central roles. And, it's what I found that I heard often was that, so much in the world of wine, especially, is using, past, similar vintage conditions
Mm-hmm.
to help gauge what to do now and in the future,
Mm.
right? That's why there's a vintage date on the vast majority of wines, except for champagne, which historically the flagship has been the Brut non-vintage,
Mm-hmm.
because historically in Champagne you're not too far outside of Paris, right? An hour and a half or so, depending on traffic, 2 hours. So it wasn't warm enough and sunny enough to appropriately ripen the grapes every single vintage. So this concept of the Brut non-vintage style evolved, and that way you could have a house style. If you like Clicquot, if you like Krug, if you like Bollinger, Tattinger, whatever it is, it was a way of blending in order to keep things, consistent.
Yeah.
And then in the best years, you would have vintage. But in general, the vast majority of wines have the vintage there. So you would be able to say, okay, this year was very hot and very dry, and then there was rain 3 weeks before the harvest. So let's go back to our historical records, which, depending upon where you're talking about, can go back, boy, centuries and centuries. If you're talking about a place like Burgundy, the better part of a millennium, in fact.
Yeah.
But then, so when winemakers say past experience is no longer as accurate or consistent a predictor of the present or future,
Mm.
that's problematic.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I started thinking maybe there's maybe there's a story here that's a book length deep dive. So along with my agent, we really fine tuned this idea, fine tuned this proposal. Um, and then she was able to sell it. We signed the book contract, and I actually, by the time it was signed, this is crazy, Blake. I wrote the book in 6 months.
No kidding.
I wrote the book,
Like it's something that you had been thinking about and processing for that long that you were ready to, okay, let's go. Right, like as soon
yeah,
as you had that open door for you.
correct. But
Okay.
what's interesting is 6 months to write a book is very, very short, right? Usually you
Yeah.
want a year at least.
Hmm.
But this was the second half of 2021. So we were still, you could travel sometimes, but other times different variants would come around. So, look, some people had babies during COVID, some people, got married or divorced or whatever it might be. So our COVID experience, we bought a house, adopted a rescue dog, and I wrote a book.
Wow.
So, we're three for three during, a once in a century pandemic.
Yeah, that's incredible. Wow, 6 months to write it, and then was the process for like was it a pretty fast like okay they've signed on for this thing and they've got like a window that they want to publish it in, so it's going to go through its process of editing and fact checking and all that kind of stuff. Did that all move fast, or was it kind of a nerve wracking experience for you to kind of have to wait for or go back and make edits yourself or change things, or what's that like?
It was so hard. And I will tell you, my editor and the entire editorial team at Roman and Littlefield who published it are fantastic. I
Mm.
love them. They were helpful and kind. But look, as a writer, I think inherently, I'm sort of neurotic. And, if you sent, and by the way, I trained for and ran a marathon during those 6 months when I was writing it, just because I
Did you?
really
Wow.
wanted to torment
This has
myself.
been like the most productive 6 months of your life.
It's all downhill from here on out for the rest of
Yeah.
my life. I'll just be saying the second half of 21, that was my peak. So, and then I dropped $7,500 on a Speedmaster, and there you go.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So and by the way, I run marathons slow enough that I can accurately time it on the Speedmaster. I'm not a fast runner.
Oh, okay.
Um,
Yeah, yeah.
I,
You're not breaking
it's
any
really,
records here, right?
no, no, maybe for slowest, but I do it and I finish and then I thoroughly enjoy my drinks and food afterwards.
Well, that's fantastic. Yeah.
So sent it in, and then there's, I mean, just so much give and take afterwards, because it's not just your editor who's reading it, but it's fact checkers and then other layers of editors, and then there's indexers that have to be brought in, and then
Mm-hmm.
and then and then. So as hard as writing a book is, and it's a heavy lift.
Mm-hmm.
I loved the process. I absolutely loved the process. What I didn't expect was, I had to reread the book, but with track changes and edits in the document, close to half a dozen times, five
Mm-hmm.
times,
Mm-hmm.
whatever it was.
Yeah.
And when you start having to figure out, okay, if I change this word or this dash into a semicolon, what are the implications of that down the line?
Mm.
So
Like for
it was,
consistency's sake.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, it was a fascinating and challenging and exhausting and rewarding process. I can't wait to do it again.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Especially now that I know what to expect.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I loved it. I loved every step along the way. But man, was I tired by the time it was done. Yeah.
Do you have? You mentioned your first book, and you a second book potentially. Do you have other ideas going through your head of that you'd want to, I guess, challenge yourself to hone down into kind of a focused topic to write a book around, or do you have a dozen of these, or is this things that are is kind of like always on your mind?
I have a few.
Okay.
I have a few. But because I'm incredibly superstitious with this stuff, it'll certainly be, in my wheelhouse. right? I mean,
Sure, sure. Okay.
the things, I'm not going to go out and, write a book on like the history of, engines in a Ferrari.
Yeah.
Uh,
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
but that's what I love is this world of what we drink and the connections that it fosters and maintains between people, I think is endlessly broad and deep.
Hmm.
So it's really a matter of figuring out what sort of lens I want to look at it through.
Yeah.
But I think I have some interesting things to say and to explore for this next one. So hopefully sooner
Okay.
rather than later.
All right. Well, I look forward to that, to hearing about that. Maybe when you get it ready and teed up, we can get you back on here to
Love it.
talk about it. So one thing I realized that we didn't do after the wrist check is a drink check
Yes.
today.
Yes.
Brian, what do you got in that glass there?
All right, so it was a challenging day today. It was
Sure.
busy. It was a very good day, but it was a a little bit of an uphill climb. Not quite Myth of Sisyphus style, but we were
Okay.
heading in that direction.
Okay.
Um, so for dinner tonight, I'm going to be making a coconut curry, a shrimp coconut
Oh,
curry.
lovely.
So I have two options chilling right now, and we'll Coravin both of them. You familiar with the Coravin?
Mm-mm. No,
Oh,
I don't know.
Blake,
What is
here.
this? What is this?
It's this amazing device where wines that are sealed, and by the way, I'm not in business with Coravin. I don't get any kickbacks. I just think this thing has changed the way I do my job. So this is a device where it takes advantage of this property of natural cork,
Mm-hmm.
which is that it essentially self heals, right? So if you can put a very clean, very small hole
Mm-hmm.
in a cork, um, and then pull it out, it will sort of close back up again. So this device it has a I don't have one here on my desk, but it has an argon canister in it, which is inert.
Yeah.
So you sink this needle into you connect the cork into the neck of the bottle, you sink the needle through the cork itself, and then you turn it upside down, hit this trigger device here, and it pumps argon into the bottle. The gas then displaces the liquid which comes out of this spout, and
Okay.
then when you get your glass or whatever it is, or for me, my 2 or 3 ounce tasting portion, you then lift out this needle, which is coated in Teflon, and then you can lay down your bottle for the next 6 to 12 months or more, and it's like you never touched it.
Oh, no kidding. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So
So
this is okay. So this is boy. This is. I wish I had talked to you about before Christmas time. This would have been a great thing for my dad, for my
oh,
father.
they're
Uh,
great. They're
yeah.
great.
However, when I think usually we'll find an excuse to finish a bottle. Granted, we don't do this for a living, so I can see where it's maybe a little bit different
Yeah, so for
on your
me,
end.
like it's if I'm tasting, let's say 2 dozen or 3 dozen Napa cabs,
Yeah.
in a day,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And if I feel like, I'm just not feeling like I'm quite as sharp, see, you have good days and bad days with your palate, with your nose. So the Coravin allows me to then taste the same bottle again a day or two
Mm-hmm.
later,
Mm-hmm.
and then pop the cork if I want. And it's as if it was never touched. So I'm getting the same liquid in the same condition,
Mm.
but with maybe a different context for my nose and my palate. So
Sure. Sure.
tonight, this is my wife requested something with a little bit of aromatic complexity, some higher acidity. So we have a single vineyard Austrian Gruner Veltliner chilling, and we have a single vineyard Vinho Verde chilling as well from Portugal. So we'll decide. But right now, I am drinking the Michter's 10-year straight rye single barrel, and this is the 2023 release. And they have this sort of handwritten label on the neck there where it says, 23 CO875, and the 23 tells us it's the 23 release. And I have sort of a small vertical of these that they're kind enough to send me samples of because I love writing about them. They're wonderful whiskeys.
Mm-hmm.
And tasting the 23, the 22, the 21 next to each other really highlights, and I love doing this when people come over to our house. It really highlights how even within this very discrete category, 10-year rye, single barrel, Michter's, um, different.
Yeah.
Not, sometimes they're subtly different, sometimes they're more dramatically different.
Hmm.
And that's one of the things that I love about this world of spirits as well, is I've been to distilleries before, Blake, where they've taken me into the rick house, and you'll have the same liquid, the exact same liquid, came off the same still, the same time, and they'll have what you'll taste from one barrel that's in the middle of the bottom floor, and then you'll go up and you'll taste a barrel that's on like the corner of the rick house on a higher floor where you're getting higher temperatures, you're getting a different humidity gradient. And after a couple of years, it tastes completely different. And
Mm-hmm.
I
Hmm.
love that. I
Yeah.
love that. That's why when people say to me, "Oh, well, I don't like bourbon," or "I don't like Chardonnay." Like, really? You've had literally all of it from everywhere in the world. Like,
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
just so much here to learn and to explore and experience.
Yeah, I can certainly appreciate that, and that's something that opened up to me not too long ago. I'm not. So I'll be honest. I'm not a huge white wine drinker, and not that I'm opposed to trying them or anything like that. I've just never found a version or a kind that really kind of resonates with me. But my wife and I were in Portugal last year, and it just had a fantastic. What a beautiful country that is, and of
Yeah.
course, Portugal is known for their land that they grow grapes on. It's a unique soil, and you probably know more about this than I do. It's a harder soil, and I think they blend more the grapes, or they'll have kind of like these more I don't know, terroir or whatever grapes grow on a certain patch of land that they'll kind of put them together. But I had this white wine there that was just absolutely fantastic, and we ordered some bottles and had them delivered back home. But that singular moment was kind of oh yeah, I probably should realize that like these things have a huge breadth of variety and where they're grown, how they're grown, and what they taste like in the bottle ultimately. And in my enjoyment of this has kind of really given me pause to, well, maybe I should be more open to trying some of these things with different types of meals or in different conditions or whatever it might be. In the same way that red wines, which I love to drink, and I used to live in Northern California and would make frequent trips to Napa with my father and spend half an afternoon just kind of going around and tasting all the things. And I loved that process and learning a little bit about how the land can change. Even the same piece of land, but if one slope faces a different direction that gets sun at a different time of the day, and how the bricks develop in a grape, which is the sweetness of it, if it has to work harder for the nutrients, and all these things, how they lend to these like small minutiae of differences in the wine itself. Has just been fascinating for me to experience, and my father and I still to this day both have wines. He lets me keep some of mine in his wine fridge. Thank you, but
What do
we'll
you
open
have
up.
in there?
I have Chateau Montelena from 2008, I think, or
Love
2006, something.
Montelena.
And then I have there was a winery. I don't know if it's still around. Coletto's, KUL. It
Yeah,
was a yeah family owned.
great
They
wines.
used to have a restaurant right down, not far off the square in San Francisco, that I don't think is still there. But we would go there and spend half a day. And Pat Coletto, I think, was the guy that owned it. So we were part of that club and accumulated a bunch of wines. I really particularly like the Sangiovese that they
Hmm.
made. So I think we've got some 2012s and some cabs and stuff like that. So and then let's see here. Well, you connected me with a source to get me Screaming Eagles,
Yes, I
bottles of
remember
Screaming
that.
Eagles, and this was for my father's retirement. And this was something that I'd asked you about, like as soon as I caught a whiff from my mother that like this was okay. I think it's gonna happen. He's gonna retire, and I thought, oh, what a great excuse to go and find something like this and gift to him. And of course, I wanted it to be two bottles, so at least one of them he would open up and enjoy with me,
Yep.
which
And
he
did you?
did. Which he did, yes, yep. And I think the second one just
And
he and my mother shared together. So
how
um,
was it?
it was fantastic. It was really fun. So we put it in a decanter and let it kind of sit for a little while. But I've noticed about wines like this is there's a quality that goes beyond just the flavor, and it's like how it develops in your mouth and how it kind of goes down your throat. It's like a hard thing to describe, but it's like a great bracelet that's like silky around your wrist. Like it's the same thing, and how it kind of it just has like this silky quality and how it goes down, and the flavor kind of evolves and develops as you drink it,
So
even in your mouth.
there's and this is, I think, so important, is we all tend to focus so intently on the flavor and aroma of a wine, but the tactile experience of the wine is so important as well, because and it's not just because of, how that texture feels on our tongue as we're swallowing it, but also to a great extent that has an impact on the foods that we'll pair with it as well.
Mm.
So I love that you're talking about the texture of the Screaming Eagle, because it does, great wine stays with you long after you have, finished each sip.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, and that texture changes just as much as the flavor and aroma. And in
Yeah.
fact, I love that you brought up Chateau Montelena. Just one of my closest friends, Scott Ziskin. His Everyone just calls him Zippy. He's this amazing designer and builder of walk-in wine cellars,
Mm.
and he has one of the most astounding collections of wine of anybody I've ever seen. And he also is one of the most generous people. So we have a group of guys, and we go to this, Italian BYOB in Philadelphia, like once a month.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and it's, everyone just bring a bottle or two, whatever it is. And last month, well, it's now February, so our last lunch of December, he showed up with two bottles of Chateau Montelena from the 1970s.
What?
And it
Oh
was,
my
and the
gosh.
cool thing was, not only were these wines spectacular, I mean, they were transcendent in terms of how elegantly and gracefully they aged. They were beautiful. But the fact that, and this is what I love about Zippy, and so much of the wine world, is, it was like, yeah, he just put it on the table. I took my tasting note, because of course I'm going to take a tasting note. And then, like, we had like the Chard with like a Caesar salad,
Yeah.
and I had the Cab with a veal marsala.
Mm.
And 2 weeks ago, I was tasting in Santa Barbara County,
Mm.
and ended up spending a morning and an afternoon with this amazing winemaker named Matt Dees. And he's the winemaker for Honada, for the Hilt. Have you had the wines of Honada or the Hilt?
I don't believe so.
Hang up right now. We'll continue this. Go out and buy them. He's doing just, I mean, he's incredible. And we started talking in the morning during our tasting, um, about, we both
Mm.
love sherry.
Mm-hmm.
And over the course of the pandemic, and after he had acquired a fair bit of old sherry at auction. And like, sherry is one of those categories where older sherry, it's not, people aren't throwing money at it the way they are, like, Grand Cru Burgundy or first or second growth Bordeaux, right?
Yeah.
Or the greats of Napa. So he was able to accumulate a fair bit of great old sherry for reasonable prices. So talk about the generosity of wine people and spirits people. Between our two tastings, we went out. It was him, me, and my friend Catherine Jarvis, who's just an amazing publicist in the world of wine. So we went out for tacos, and he brought what we believe was a 100-year-old Fino sherry from Gonzales Villas, from Tio Pepe.
Yeah.
And it was like, sure, let's just open it and enjoy it with our taco lunch. And you know
Yeah.
what I learned? Almost century old Tio Pepe Fino is silly delicious with great guacamole. So there you
Amazing.
go.
All right. I love
Yeah.
these are the kind of experiences that I love about these hobbies. And I know that people kind of collect and buy watches and wine and kind of stick them away and rarely see them or anything like that, or pull them out of a safe every now and then. But yeah, I feel like you develop relationships with not only these things, but with the people that we experiencing them with. you know, the more that we buy watches or wines that we're more inclined to drink or share or use, you know, even if it's not the most expensive or fanciest thing in the world, you know, I always say the one that you grab for is the one that you're going to end up developing the most memories in, and it's going to end up meaning the most to you at the end of the day. And then sharing that with other people in the space, I think, is sharing those experiences is really what keeps you around, right, for the long haul. And it kind of makes you feel more comfortable with your place in here, in these spaces. And I feel like, you know, for example, when Tudor released their Black Pelagos FXD, they did it down in Florida, and it was my first kind of exposure to real diving after I had become open water certified. And I got to do the dive with the new watch with all of these people. And it bonded me not only to them, that experience, but also like to the watch in a weird way. And we all bonded to the watch. And I think almost all of us that were down on that dive have ended up buying the watch and now own it personally because of that experience. And those are the things that stick with you for the long haul. And those are things that you look back on and talk about. And that I feel like means a lot more than having a really nice, expensive watch that just kind of sits around or sits in the watch box or sits in a safe or something like that. You know, not that I judge anyone who does that, but I feel like the meat of these hobbies, or really what makes it worth sticking around, are the people and having these experiences with the people. And I think that's one thing that I really love so much about the cocktail culture, the wine culture, all that kind of stuff, because it's people that are curious about these things in the same type of ways and can have these types of experiences together. And what a generous group of people that seem to be around in both. So sharing.
They're means of connection. And that's what we all need more than ever, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So sharing, I like the idea of pairing something like this with, I guess, quote unquote, normal food that we like eat all the time, where it's not like at a 5-star restaurant or anything like that. Is that something that you recommend to people to do?
Yes.
Often?
Yes.
Okay.
Blake, take the stuff off the pedestal. I mean, it's so my friend Zippy, he also runs when I describe it as a tasting group, he corrects me and says, "No, Brian, it's a drinking group." And
it sounds classier your way, though, Brian.
Yeah, but it's more.
I would tell my parents that I'm going to a tasting thing, but I would tell my friends I'm going to a drinking thing.
Well, I tried to pass it off as a tasting group, and then by the time my parents and my wife actually came to one of them, they're like, "Oh, this is a drinking group, and it's so much better than a tasting group." So here's the deal. It's in a wine storage warehouse in New Jersey. Excuse me. I get emotional when I start talking about this. That's why I'm coughing. So not that my rye went down the wrong pipe. So, and there's a theme for each month's meeting. And maybe it's first growth Bordeaux. Maybe it could be Sonoma Pinot Noir from within 20 miles of the coast. Maybe whatever it might be. And everyone brings a bottle or 2 or 3 or whatever it is. And then usually some item of food. And it could be pizza, tomato pie, hoagies, cheesesteaks, whatever. There's usually a cheese tray there, charcuterie. And I will say to you, Blake, I have had more first and second growth Bordeaux, like old Lafite and fully mature Mouton, whatever it might be, with Italian hoagies at this drinking group. And I will tell you that these are wines that are meant to be consumed with food, and winemakers all over the world. And I'm privileged to be able to spend a good deal of time with winemakers around the world. And few things make them happier than when they hear about like this, a bottle of wine that they put so much heart and soul and sweat and lost weeks of sleep. Then when somebody just pops that cork and has it with a great meal with people who they enjoy being around, because that's what this stuff is about. And I've done, I also do a good deal of consulting, right? And sometimes that takes the form of going into somebody's cellar and giving them advice, right? This you need to drink now. This you could probably give it another 10, 20 years. But there's always that section where I am less wine consultant and more grim reaper.
Mm.
And I'm looking at this stuff saying, this would have been great 10 or 20 years ago, but you held on too long.
Yeah. Yeah.
And always, you can always decant a wine if you opened it up too early. You can always keep it, you pop the cork and then it's not quite ready. So you put the cork back on, leave it on your counter, try it the next day. So there's always things you can do if you open a wine too early.
Mm-hmm.
But if you wait too long, you're kind of out of luck, right? And you're stuck.
How do you
So
know if it's been too long? Like if you don't come in there and somebody just grabs one of these bottles, opens it up, pours a glass with their meal, are they gonna know right away? Like, oh, this is no good, or it's just like not as good as it could have been, or just like downright undrinkable?
there's a continuum, right?
Okay.
And so much of that continuum is based on personal perception. I mean, look, yes, there are wines that are so far past their prime that it's just, everything is out of whack, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember?
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember those Venn diagrams from middle school geometry class
Yeah.
with the overlapping circles?
Yeah.
So for me, a balanced wine, a harmonious wine, is one where the circle of alcohol and the circle of tannin and the one of fruit and the one of spice and the one of savory and so on and so forth, they're overlapping in a way that's pleasing to you,
Mm-hmm.
right? There is no platonic ideal, but in a way that's pleasing to you. But all wines at some point will get to a point where, it's just the acidity is completely out of balance with the tannin. There's no fruit left. Maybe, it's gotten oxidized. So there are times where you will know, like, ooh, yep, this one's dead.
I missed
But
it.
then
Yeah.
there's people who really prefer fully mature wines,
Mm-hmm.
and there's other people who prefer wines that are much earlier in their evolution. I like to tell the story, my parents have been married, I want to say their 50th anniversary. We're in February now, so it's coming up next month. 50 years, right? And they're the reason I'm in this line of work. My dad has collected wine since before I was born. My mom is just a wonderful, wonderful cook. And they both made a point, as my sister and I were growing up, of making sure that we all sat down at the table virtually every night to a great meal. There was always wine on there. I've been tasting with my dad since I was 6. I tell people that's why I'm short. And, but for them, my dad prefers more mature wines,
Mm-hmm.
right? Further along in their evolution in the cellar. My mom loves the texture of tannin. She likes younger wine. She likes that grippiness.
Mm.
So, that's even people who otherwise have a very happy, healthy marriage can't agree on how long they should age their wine,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
it is a personal thing, but I would always recommend open up on the side of too young than too old for your wine. Because at least, and also, Blake, if you open up a wine, let's say you open up a red and you're like, damn, it's just slightly too young. The tannins aren't silky enough. They're not melted enough. There's still a little too much structure
Mm-hmm.
defining this wine. Pair it with food that has fat and protein.
Mm.
On a chemical level, that will attenuate some of that tannin. So there's things you can do.
Yeah.
On the upside, because my mom likes more tannic wines, my dad tends to prefer wines that are a little more mature in their evolution. It means that there's often many, many wines open at their table, which works out great. But then my wife and I argue about who has to drive home because we both want to drink everything.
Sure.
That's the
Sure.
stress in our marriage.
Yeah, yeah, of course. So, how would people know if, if somebody has, I don't know, like not a whole wine cellar or something, but maybe 7, 8, 10, 15 bottles of wine stuck somewhere in their place. How do they know if, oh, this is going to be too late, or I should drink this in this window, or I'm getting close on this one? Like that Chateau Montelena. Like, I don't know when I should drink that. If
Yeah.
it's
Well,
2007 or 2006 or whatever, you know.
you can always email me. Give me a call. I'll tell you when to drink it.
Okay.
But
Okay.
if for anybody who's listening who does not have my phone number, um, you know,
Yeah.
my first recommendation is find a wine writer whose palate aligns with yours.
Okay.
And that's, because not every wine writer or wine critic has the same palate, right? I mean, everyone has different preferences when it comes to what they respond to with wine. So find a wine writer whose palate aligns with yours. Um, and then after that, I would say make sure that you get proper wine storage. Because
Mm-hmm.
all of us who write about wine, we tend to spend a lot of our professional lives. I mean, yes, of course, we all have just mind-blowingly lucky access to taste. We have friends who will open up Old Montelena. My friend Tamar Zip is opening up a 1976 Domaine de la Romane Conti, which I could literally sell that and buy another one of my houses right now, I think. So,
Sure,
you know,
sure.
crazy
Yeah.
stuff. But, when I'm tasting for work, a lot of us tend to drink wines that are new releases. So then
Mm-hmm.
we have to say, okay, is this going to be ready in 20 years, in 30 years, in 10 or 5, whatever it might be?
Yeah.
Drinking windows are generally based on the assumption that you will be storing it in appropriate cellar conditions. 55, 56 degrees Fahrenheit, no UV light, low or no vibrations, higher humidity, and so on and so forth. But those are
Mm-hmm.
the important ones. So even if that means going to Home Depot, right? And pick up a 24 bottle wine fridge. You don't need dual zone temperatures because you're not a restaurant, right? Keep everything at 55 and you'll be safe. That will Just doing that, invest a couple $100 in a wine fridge. That will change your wine life completely because that'll extend the longevity of your wines and not just the ones that are meant to age. Because look, the vast majority of wine produced around the world every year is not meant to age for more than a few years,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's the misperception that a lot of people still have is, oh my God, this wine is from Bordeaux. It must need at least 10 years. Bordeaux is giant. It can take hours to drive from one part of Bordeaux to the other. So
Yeah.
the part of Bordeaux in the Médoc, for example, right, where the great first gross and the class gross of 1855 are located, sure, in a great vintage, the great chateau, age them if you got the storage. But then there's also wines from like Bordeaux Superior where you can drink them on release, and some of them you can age for years. But just because a wine is from a specific place doesn't mean that aging is a necessity. But if you have a proper wine fridge, that will at least give you some buffer
Mm-hmm.
on either end.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
also, what do they say? Most people and age their wine for exactly as long as it takes to drive home from the wine store.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
it's Blake, I'd rather people, buy their wine and drink it in the short term and then buy more,
Yeah.
than buy wine and hold on to it because they assume it needs to go for a decade and then it's dead when they pop the cork.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I suppose that's most people's experience of it. It's, oh, we're gonna make whatever, some chicken and rice tonight for dinner. Why don't you pick up a bottle of wine on your way home from work? And then that's how it goes. And then they drink it that night. It's not like they're
Yeah,
storing, all these bottles of wine. And even that's just
exactly.
like, I don't have the proper conditions here to store my wine. That's why I keep it at in my father's wine cooler or fridge or whatever it's called.
Hmm.
And there's stag's leap stuff in there too, which I also quite like. And some
It's great stuff.
Silverado oak stuff and the Napa Valley Reserve. I
Oh,
don't think that's
yes.
publicly available.
It's not.
Langa and Zana ages ago took some of us watch journalists there to their grounds, and we spent a couple of days, and that's what we drank for the whole time. And then they gifted us a bottle in like this beautiful wooden box, and only just like within the past couple of years, I drank that with my father as well, and that was just fabulous.
It's great
There's so many just like hidden away gems here that are kind of like exclusive, like, oh, you wouldn't even know about it unless you know somebody or know who to ask.
Yeah.
And it was just like those Screaming Eagles. Like, it's not like you can walk into your local wine store or merchant or whatever and snag a bottle. Like
No.
you got to know somebody, and then maybe you can get in on a part of a buy or something like that.
Yeah.
Like I had to really
But
sell
the
this
fact
guy.
that you're drinking,
Yeah.
the
Like
fact that you're drinking these, I love that.
Look, man, I have a hard time just like letting it sit there, and I love those experiences, with my father, with my wife, with my family. That means a lot to me. So, and it's something that I hope I can share with my son in time. He's 11, but I haven't let him sip on any of my wine just
Okay.
yet. But he's very tall, so maybe it's safe at this point. Maybe that's a generational thing. I feel like in the 70s, 60s, maybe even 80s, it wasn't as big a deal for parents to let that kind of stuff slide, and I get that from my family even sometimes too. When I was this holiday, my mom, it was specific. She wanted grasshoppers. She wanted me to make grasshoppers for all of her family that was coming over, and I was like, wow, that's a blast from the past.
Yeah.
So we got the stuff, and I adjusted the spec a little bit to something that I thought would be a little bit more palatable for everyone. And literally everyone over the age of 11 got to like have a little bit. And of course it kind of tastes like candy and all that. It's like creme de mint and creme de cacao and vodka, all shaken over ice. In Wisconsin, I think it's tradition to even make it with like a bit ice cream in it. As well, so it's like a real like velvety, thick, like something you get from Dairy Queen, maybe.
And also because a grasshopper is not sweet enough, you need to add.
Yeah,
ice
you
cream.
need to add a little bit more. Exactly. Yeah, I had a couple drinks of it, and I felt like, ooh, that was But I prefer more of a bitter cocktail. I don't know if I mentioned I was drinking a white Negroni, which is one of my favorite, just kind of like go-tos after a long day or on a Friday night or something like that. And I like the classic spec. I like Suze a lot, which is a very unusual ingredient, very earthy, kind of beet-like in its quality, which I think is fabulous. And I think it pairs really well with, I make it with Lillet. I know a lot of people use different kind of blanc or white vermouths. And then gin, of course, and I use Plymouth on that. And so, but I like that during the COVID era, I guess those few years, a lot of people got into these hobbies, and the cocktails were one of mine. And my sister-in-law and her husband gifted me a book from Death and Company.
Nice, great books.
And now, like, I've since gone on to buy like all of their. I think it was like the Cocktail Codex or something, because I like cocktails, and I was kind of aware that there was a whole world there, and then this kind of opened up the doors of there's a huge world here, and so kind of getting an understanding of these base cocktails, and then how to like riff on those and dial them into your preferences and all that kind of stuff. And then before you know it, you end up with a bar full of like these weird exotic ingredients that you want to try. Maybe you don't like them all, but you've got these huge bottles. That was definitely me for a period there. And then you realize like, okay, maybe I went a little too far here. You dial it back, and
there's no too far. I mean, it's equipment. You never know, but when somebody's going to come over and say, I want a blank, right? And you can be the hero and do that.
Yeah, and that's been...
Are you a...
Yeah.
Please, go ahead.
I said that's been me on a couple of occasions where an ingredient that I didn't particularly care for. So.
Right, but you're a legend because you had it, right?
That's exactly.
Now, are you a measurer? Like I am militant about. I have 3 or 4 different jiggers, and everything gets measured. Yeah. How do you approach this?
Yeah, I am as well, and I wasn't before this time. I don't think it was something I talked or really thought much about, making gin and tonics or Cuba Libres or whatever. But making something like a martini or a Manhattan or an old fashioned or a Negroni. Well, there's really just a couple few ingredients in there. In the balance between all of them is very, very important. So after I got that book, I did get proper tools to both mix in like a glass jar to mix with a stir, or if I'm doing something with like a lime juice or a lemon juice, proper shaking equipment and stuff like that, and being able to strain it properly. And then of course the jigger where I can measure everything properly. Yeah. And since then I feel like I've gotten into a comfortable enough space with how I make cocktails that I can kind of riff on them even a little bit. Yes. And like I've even tried different things, putting Suze in different things. And the Aviation is another one of my favorite cocktails because I really enjoy creme de violet. Even though Maraschino liqueur is not my favorite thing.
Hmm.
But like all of these, like it opened up a world of kind of being, well, once you understand how these things are constructed, then you can start playing with it a little bit more. And, now I understand, where people will, prefer like a Manhattan with rye or with bourbon or same with old fashioned. And now I have my own like old fashioned that I make. In Wisconsin, old fashions are kind of like a big thing. But I
Yeah.
make mine with bourbon. I don't use sugar, but I'll put a little bit of dry curacao in there, which adds a little bit of the
Oh,
sweetness. It adds a little bit of the orange notes without me having to put orange slices and sugar cubes in
huh.
the drink. So for mixing it like quickly at home, I found that adds a really nice balance to things. But it's just been a really incredible journey for me over the past few years, learning about this this stuff.
Well, that's the old it's the old Picasso story, right? Like he was classically trained, and only then was he able to completely blow everything apart, literally and figuratively, right?
Yeah.
So it's same thing with cocktails. It's once you understand the interaction of the components and how something as little as, two dashes instead of four,
Yeah.
or an eighth of an ounce difference or a quarter ounce difference in your vermouth or your gin in your martini can
Yeah.
have a dramatic impact.
Hmm.
That's when you can start making these things your own.
Yeah.
And that's, yeah.
How do you feel like? Does this affect when you go out or when you're at like a nice bar and you want a nice drink? Like how you order a drink? Like my wife will
Mm,
come down on me if I go into too much detail of, "Oh, but can you make it like this or can you serve it like this?" She's like, "Oh my
yeah,
god, do you really have to?" Well, if it's a nice bar and I'm paying a lot of money, I might as well like ask, "Can I get it?" Or can I get it
absolutely.
served like that? Then,
Yeah.
I'm sure it's
So,
the same with wine. Like, do you ever feel like an asshole when you walk into a restaurant and start,
so,
like
so,
more than all these
so
people?
I guess the first thing is, I'm just grateful to be swallowing my drinks instead of spitting them and taking notes once I'm out for dinner. So I'm like, oh man, I get to drink this stuff.
Sure.
Bring it. I'll take 4 bottles of no. It's but so that. But look, I think when it comes to cocktails in particular, before I order, I'll sort of scan what's going on behind the bar, right?
Okay.
And I'll let that be my gauge. So like if I see somebody order a Manhattan and then it's being free poured and then Lord help us shaken, it's like, you
Yeah.
know what, I'm gonna get a whiskey neat and call it a day.
Yeah.
Um,
What beers do you have on draft?
yeah, because I really you're shaking this dude's Manhattan, right? Or like if you're and I know I'm gonna get dinged for this, but I am not a huge fan of muddling my fruit in my old fashions. That's
Okay.
me.
Yeah.
I have, however, had some wonderful old fashions with muddled fruit. That's just not the style I prefer.
Yeah.
But like if I see, like the neon maraschino cherries,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
getting, there's like 6 of them getting thrown in there. I'm like, maybe not for me. So I'm looking around, and trying to see again. I mean, look, I love me a good neon maraschino cherry. Just for me personally, I like a
Sure.
good, a Luxardo or a Fabri, whatever.
Yeah.
Um, but so I'll look and gauge. The other thing that I always check when it comes to wine, if I do get a glass of wine, and generally speaking, when I go to a bar, I'm not drinking wine. I tend to drink 90%, 95% of my wine with food.
Mm.
It's not that often that I'll pop a cork, and my wife and I will, and she's a great lover of wine. She loves bourbon. She has an amazing palate. I often feel professionally threatened by her, and she's not in the business, but great
Sure.
palate. And but for me, if I do see, for example, that the wines by the glass are being pulled from bottles behind the bar,
Mm.
which
Mm-hmm.
is really warm,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Then right away I'm like, I'm not doing that because, we talk about, people always say, oh, well, red wine is supposed to be served room temperature. Room temperature means like a chateau in France 500 years ago. Like room temp means like cool for the
Yeah.
most part. If you're
Yeah.
serving your reds at 72 degrees, it's going to taste like, grape juice with vodka and pretensions added to it,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
So,
Yep.
so I
Mm-hmm.
scan the situation first.
Okay, that's a wise approach. I love it. Well, I want to be conscious of your time. I could sit here all day and talk cocktails with you. We'll have to have you on again sometime soon. But Brian, where can people go find more of you? Can they go follow you on Instagram or go find your writing? Where
Yes.
can people go find more of you?
So you can find me. You can find me like 6 times a month at foodandwine.com. That's been just such a privilege and such a highlight of my career to be able to work with the amazing team there. They're so smart and so professional and just so nice. So I love writing for them. Uh, Please follow me on Instagram. I'm at Freedman Reports, Freedman Reports. And actually, Blake, when we're talking about during the pandemic, the
Mm-hmm.
lockdowns, and we all got into mixology. So I started, and it was not my idea, it was my wife's. So props and credit to her. Started a show, a little web series on Instagram called Day Drinking with Brian. And it
Yes.
started because literally we were day drinking, and she said, we should film you talking about your day drinking. And tomorrow I'm about to post episode 150.
Wow. All right. All
Um,
right. Congratulations.
Thank you, thank you. So we've, it's grown a little bit. It's been a lot of fun. I've been recording on location whenever I'm traveling around the world. So yeah, give me a follow at Freedman Reports, and I link
All right.
up everything that I write there. And buy
All
the
right.
book. My rescue dog is expensive, so that helps.
Yeah. All right. And that is crushed. I'll leave links to all this stuff down below so you can go over to the deeptrack.com and get linked into all of this stuff. All right. Well, that will do it for our episode. Brian, thank you again for joining me on the Deep Track podcast. I really appreciate your time today.
Blake, it has been so much fun. Honestly, this has been like the highlight of my day. Let's do this again with even more cocktails in our hand.
All right. I would love that. I would love that. And we're both on the East Coast, so maybe we can get together next time and maybe some bar will let us
100%.
record in there.
Yes, but
Yeah.
first we'll watch how they're making their cocktails
Yeah,
before we order.
of course, yeah. All right, well, that will do it for this episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. A reminder that you can support the Deep Track on Patreon. I'll leave a link to that down below as well. Thanks again to Brian, and until next time, take care.